La 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 da 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 da. Woo! Can you get me for copyright on that one? I don't think so, because I did that so terribly. Ooh, boy. All right, it is time for another Q&A episode. Boy, I've been loving these, and all of you seem to have been loving these. I really enjoy doing them, where I can just spend a good hour doing Q&A. I know a lot of people were, well, a little miffed that I took the Q&A segment out of Sovereign Tech proper. But part of it is that I got so many questions, like there's no way every week Sovereign Tech would just have to be a question show. I have such a backlog that I'll be doing for all of these episodes, and it really just comes down to how many can I record, or how many can I get to within an hour, or sometimes I even take an hour and a half or whatever. So anyway, I know people were disappointed, but I'm so glad all the people, and we keep adding them on every week. More people come on already this week. This is Wednesday. Of course, I try to release these Q&As every Wednesday. I can't guarantee that I can't make that 100% guarantee. Like with the official Sovereign Tech, I make damn fucking sure that every Saturday, even if it's Pacific time, that you're getting an episode. But in any case, I try to get these out every Wednesday. I'm all over the place. So thank you so much, of course, for all those that donate. This being Wednesday, we've already got some new people donating. That's what I was going to say. And I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the Q&A episodes. If any of the content that I'm putting out there, if you have I'd like more of this, or I want to hear more of this, some people have let me know. Like they've told me, well, I want to hear more history. I want to hear more about and I am more than happy to get into all of that. It's a fun subject for me to talk about. It is, well, as I've often said, I'm a gamer first, I'm a historian second, and I'm a tech journalist third. So anytime I can get into number two, well, that came out funny, but double pun, but I like to do that. I like to get into the history and stuff. And I think later in this episode, we are going to get in knee deep into some history. But I'll save that for later on. Before I get into our first question, I'm going to try to get into 3 questions here. I'm going to try and make it as quick as I can. Before I do that, I just want to briefly mention that we are thinking, there's some thought of, because we've talked about, and I've mentioned on this before, the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy and I, we've talked about building a second studio, and we are working on it, a second studio here in the dungeon, which if you haven't noticed yet, yes, I am recording on the Blue Yeti once again, and I am in the dungeon. And in so doing, not just doing like this really simplistic, second studio that's just utilitarian and designed to maximize maximize audio quality with as small a budget as possible. That's still something we're looking at, of course, but I've been tempted to get into doing video. A little bit, not a lot, but the videos I would do would be high end. I'm not talking about doing video to where, and this is no offense to anybody that does this, I'm not talking about video to where it just kind of like switches between, faces, talking heads and all that. I'm not talking about doing that. I'm talking about doing full video to where there's a studio that gets built. And I already had, so a lot of the equipment needed to do this, I have listed at the Amazon wish list for Sovereign Tech, which is at wishlist.zog.ninja to find that. But I mean, there's some, I have some interesting ideas, and I mean, there would be, an automated camera, all kinds of wild stuff that I have in mind for it. So you can let me know if this is, since I consider the Patreon subscribers like I don't want to say you're the diehard fans or anything, because I wouldn't want you to think that you just follow anything I do. I'm just saying that you're the people that are a little more invested in what comes out of my mouth in a very real way, and I'm so honored by that. I hope you see it as much as value for value as I do. And so, I'm thinking about doing video. I have a lot of other projects that I'm still working on and that need to get completed and all that. But I guess I'm just asking, like, kind of outright, like, what do you think about video? And I'm talking about doing documentary style video, where, and it could be full on documentaries on things, really, really serious, more high end stuff. Because to do high end work, you actually don't need a whole lot of money. To make that happen. So I think it's very possible. I've recently studied what it takes to make a studio set, to where, people can have, like, a couch where people can even sit down and do interviews, or, where at least you can walk around to some degree and show off, sort of what you're talking about and blah, blah, blah. So just let me know, if you want to message me on Patreon, if you want to leave a comment at the bottom of this sound on Patreon, take advantage of the social media aspects of Patreon. Please don't hesitate to do that, or you can email me. It's totally up to you how you want to get in touch with me. But I am intrigued by that. I also have some other projects, one of which is done, that I've been working with just a great friend on. That I am looking forward to. So some of this admittedly is tough. Like, my schedule is really, really insane. And it has been due to some family things, as late, that, where it's been really crazy, and it's been very difficult to stay on top of responding to people and to getting other, some projects forwarded, but that's kind of settled now. So anyway, there's some other great projects coming. There's going to be a lot of, I'm a firm believer in getting out a lot of value to people, because people have been very gracious in their donations. People have been very gracious in, being patrons, being Patreon subscribers. And overall, just people are interested in, in hammering out what we hammer out on Sovereign Tech. And I'm really honored by all that. So anyway, I want to, I'm just thinking of ways, get this next level, because I'm not boasting here. Please understand, this isn't meant to be a boast. I'm just saying that Sovereign Tech reaches out with anarchist ideals to audiences that I don't know many other shows that do. Many other shows with anarchist ideals that that reach these kinds of audiences. As much as I've tried, and I've talked about this on other Q&As, I've talked about it where, I've tried to kind of break into, it's weird. I tried to break into, certain anarchist circles, and it just never, I don't know, it just doesn't click. Like, I don't get it. There's you, obviously, but to trying to get into more like mainstream anarchist crowds, it doesn't seem to happen, and I'm not exactly sure why. I have theories, but I just, for whatever reason, I just don't break into those echelons of anarchism. And even though it's kind of crazy that there's echelons in anarchism. Anyway, pardon me. I'm just going to have a little swig of seltzer water here. Lime seltzer. All right. Tried doing water only. Didn't exactly work, but seltzer definitely helped me kick the soda habit. Anyway, so that's something I'm thinking about. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And from time to time in these various, specials, I may ask the patrons what, your thoughts on things, on, directions perhaps to take it. It's good to know. And I think, and I'm not saying this because you listen to my show. I do consider that somewhat of a barometer of you having, a certain mentality, but I think you're smart people. Very smart people. And so, why wouldn't I want to ask you a question? Just like I think a lot of times you ask me because, you feel that I'm not going to say I'm a smart person, but just that I'm knowledgeable in certain subjects. And, I'm honored by that. And, I would be honored if you gave me an answer on some of the questions that I ask you. Not that you have to, please. I'm not expecting anything. I'm just saying I know I have a very intelligent audience. That is one of the goals of Sovereign Tech. One of the growing goals of Sovereign Tech is that it doesn't treat the person listening to the sound of my voice as a moron. As to where most infotainment, most any media creation is designed to appeal to the masses, to the muckbrons, it's designed to appeal to the average. And I totally disagree with that. I've talked about this before, where Gene Roddenberry made it very clear that his idea with everything that he made from Star Trek onwards, was that the person on the other side of the TV screen was not stupid. They were not an idiot. And I think that's what has allowed that intelligence, that willingness, that that drive to make really intelligent content is why so much of Gene Roddenberry's work still stands the test of time. Why Star Trek is still so fucking good. And even some other things, like some of his lesser known works that I personally love, like Genesis 2, and some of these other ones, they really, especially when Gene was there, they've kind of carried on. Now, I mean, we can get into the Gene versus Herb Salow, like who made things great, debate another time. But anyway, so there you have it. Enough of that. We're 10 minutes in, and I haven't even gotten to the first question. So let's get to the first question. And it's a great one. And actually it's a great segue, what we were just talking about, into the very first question. My first question was going to be about sex robots. I'm going to save that for after this. I'll make that the second question now. But my first question comes from obviously a Patreon subscriber asking, my question: armed with your current knowledge and experience, what would you do to start a fresh podcast? Would you be concerned with all the competition flooding the podcast market? Reason I ask: I've spent many hours and enough money getting myself a good mobile studio. I got several sample casts posted, but I've never done anything beyond that. Why am I doing a podcast? Who's listening, and what value do they get from it? Do I just want attention and recognition? What about marketing? Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. I love the little Ghostbusters reference there. And then it said, peace, my bald brother. Right on. Peace to you as well. So I think this is a great question. It's probably been a year, maybe two, since I did a special it was in the main Sovereign Tech feed, where I talked about, how to make a podcast, what I do. Because I got that question asked a lot. And I still get that question asked a lot. And so I'll redress it here, because actually I've grown, really. I know for a fact that I've grown since the last podcast special that I did. And I've experimented a lot more since the last, how to make a podcast special that I did. So this is definitely something that needs to be revisited. This will not be a rehash by any means. So great question. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you for being a patron of Sovereign Tech. And yeah, you hit at the first part that I think is the most important, which is why. You've got the equipment. That's great. Obviously, that's number one. You got to have the equipment, right? And if you got a mobile studio, that's great. That's really cool. I mean, there's a lot of advantages to that. I won't go into what's best for a mobile studio. I'll tell you, if you want to find out what great equipment to use, you want to go to Stephanie's website, smvoice.info, and she has a blog post there about all the equipment that she uses. And she does reviews for equipment and everything. It's really slick. So do hit that up if you want. But if you want to know more particulars, of course, you can email me. I mean, I'm always open about what equipment I use. When I'm doing the main episode of Sovereign Tech and I'm in the studio, I use what's called an RE20. That's the microphone that I use. Often when I am mobile, I use the Blue Yeti, which is what I'm on right now, which, again, is a fine microphone. It's fine for what it is, and it's only like $100. Okay, in fact, I need another one, but I mean, it's not because, the thing has gotten a ton of use. It's really solid. If I want to be super mobile, there is the company Zoom, which is also, I think Zoom is actually, Zoom is the same company as Samson, which has a much longer history in the kind of the recording, the audio realm. Samson, as in Samson, not Samsung, but Samson. And they have the H1. They also have higher end ones like the H6, I think, and the or maybe it's like the H4. They have a bunch of different models. Any of those are great. I can also tell you that Brett uses, I think, the H6 at points, and because you can hook up like XLR connections with other microphones. I mean, it is a genuine mobile studio. It's damned impressive. That sort of thing doesn't work. The idea of just having microphones and that I go and edit it all up later, that doesn't work with the way I do podcasts. But I'm going to save how I do podcasts for a minute here. Anyway, that's some of the equipment. I always like to admit what I use. I use the H1, like I said, when I'm super mobile, but it goes all the way up to the RE20. And that's all, a lot of that's really Stephanie's equipment anyway. If we're going to put a fine point on it. But so the first question to ask is the one that you were really asking, which is why do it? Why even make a podcast? And I think that's an important to ask yourself, because that leads to what you want to do with the podcast, where you're going to go with the podcast, what audience you're trying to reach, and all of this. And those are all great questions. There's the first one. Why am I doing a podcast? Who's listening, and what value would they get from it? Do I just want attention and recognition? What about marketing? All right. So let's start off with why am I doing a podcast? And that there's kind of a second question there. Do I just want attention and recognition? If you just want celebritydom, okay, if that's why you're doing a podcast, is like you would just like some degree of celebritydom and maybe make some money off of doing it, there's nothing wrong with either of those reasons. There's nothing wrong with wanting celebritydom, in my opinion. That's not why I do a podcast. I'd be remiss if I said like that the thought never crossed my mind, but that really is not why I started a podcast. And it doesn't even really have to be celebritydom. Maybe you just want to like make a name for yourself. And there's something to that too. Those are two different things in my opinion. Like one of the things, when you have to experience, recently, I've had to experience, death of people, close in my life, we'll say. And, when that kind of happens, you do start to think about legacy. Now, I'm not talking about legacy like conventional normies talk about legacy, where it's like, what are my children going to have? Like all this different stuff. I don't think about it that way. But, is there something, there's something to wanting to be remembered. Will people remember you? Will you have had an impact perhaps? These are things people think about. It's really, I would, at the same time as a hedonist, I would say, it's not really your, it's not some like thing you have to do where you have to make the world better, or you have to, like that's the goal and all that. No, none of that shit. Okay. But there's something for wanting to be remembered. That's okay. That's a legitimate desire, to have. And I certainly have that. And I'll admit there's a comfort to me to that if I died tomorrow, kind of like the Motley Crue song, right? If I died tomorrow, that I would have, a certain corpus of work that will always be out there, that will always be available, to where people can remember what I thought, who I was, and what I did. That's really cool, to think about. There's nothing wrong with, honestly, if you wanted to do a podcast for no other reason, that's totally, it's totally legit. I think any answer really that you have is legit. There's some that I think might be dubious. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to give examples on that, but just saying that, that's okay. If you want celebritydom, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, you're just doing that to, because you want to be a celebrity and all that. So what? So that's what you want to do. Go for it. My reason has always been because my opinions are not voiced. I want representation, and obviously I don't believe politicians could ethically do that, nor are they capable of doing that. So I want my opinions to be heard. I don't hear anybody else saying them, largely. I am happy, and I give credit when I do hear them, being voiced elsewhere. But because they're not, well, I voice them. Now, it's to the point to where I have, somewhat of a larger audience. Again, understand, these are interesting metrics to know here, is that the average podcast in the world lasts 7 episodes. Okay. Now I'm up to, I think technically, if you count in all the specials I've done and all the Patreon content, I'm actually up to like episode 300 something, but I've done 190 main episodes of Sovereign Tech. We're coming up on episode 200 fast, and boy, have I got some plans for that. But the average podcast only goes 7 episodes. Also, the average podcast has less than 100 uniques or listeners. Uniques just mean like unique downloads or unique streams. So that's just another word for listeners, really. So as to where, I'm pretty much in the point of, actually in the last month, I've had about 1,000 more uniques. So I'm getting into the 11,000 listener range, somewhere around there. It's very high, and it's tough to collate a lot of those numbers. And sometimes like SoundCloud does a rough job of collecting all the numbers. Stitcher's recently gotten better about it. Patreon has recently allowed for, to track some of those metrics and all that. So it's very tough to get those numbers. I could have far more listeners than I'm aware of, and then also if you're on affiliates like LRN or UCY TV, and things like this, then you have a whole other set of numbers that you need to look at. If you're on TuneIn, if you get, featured on TuneIn or something, there's a whole other set of numbers. It's very tough to get those numbers. So you really, while I think it's important to establish that you're at least above average, depending upon the reasons of why you're doing this, why you're doing a podcast in the first place, understand that at a certain point, you can't exactly keep track. Here's an example, like with Leo Laporte, with This Week in Tech, the Twit network, arguably the most successful and popular podcast network on the planet. So with the Twit network, recently they discovered, they went through a new company that helped them track their uniques and track all their listens and reach and engagement and all that. And they're paying, believe me, they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars to get those numbers. Okay, just like in the radio business, to get what adds up to being the Nielsen ratings for radio. It's a different. I think it's Arbitron. I think is the radio version of that. To get those numbers, you pay out like $30,000 a quarter. Like it's crazy, to find out about this sort of thing. So anyway, it costs money to find out like your actual listener numbers generally, unless you do a lot of your own work. And some of that, even then you run into roadblocks to find that stuff out. But point being is that with Twit, they thought like their show Security Now, which is my favorite, and I think it's their second most popular show. For years, they've said, according to our metrics, we get 86,000 uniques an episode. Then they recently paid this new company to find out how many listeners they're getting. And come to find out, they're getting closer to 200,000 uniques, per episode of Security Now on the Twit network. Okay, and so you can only imagine how much the main show, This Week in Tech, gets. I mean, that's got to be through the roof. And those numbers could have grown recently as well. So point being is that it's very tough to know exactly how many people are listening. You can usually only, kind of get around or, get a guesstimate, an estimate of how many people are listening in. But this leads to kind of a second point with the podcast, which is, it's part of why are you doing it? And that's the thing. If you are looking to get into podcasting to make money, which would require you to have a lot of listeners, because understand this, while I have, thousands and thousands of listeners, the amount of engagement I get from that is significantly less. Like, I don't know if it even equates to 1%. Like, the amount of Patreon subscribers I have, isn't even 100. So, so you see, like, I don't even have 10% of listeners that are engaged in other areas, like, and including with social media. So I have around 7,000 Twitter followers, and I mean, maybe all told across the various forms of social media, I might have 9,000 to 10,000 followers. Okay. But then I have more listeners than that. So where are those other listeners? Well, I mean, the unique thing with Sovereign Tech is that I'm reaching out to an audience that is big, perhaps, on not being on social media, that are big on not being, not having attachments and having multiple accounts to which to connect to me with. So, in some ways I've kind of shot myself in the foot, as far as that goes. But bottom line being is that I've only very recently started making any amount of money, and believe me, it's not much now, with Sovereign Tech. It took a while. I had to build the audience first. Okay, you're not going to make money out of the gate. In fact, I've talked with some other podcasting friends and ones that have achieved similar quote unquote success as Sovereign Tech. We all kind of have a similar story where it took 4 to 5 years before they were making any money off of it. So understand that you're likely not going to make money off of this gig until much later on, until further down the road with the show that you're doing. It can take 4 years. I mean, it took me probably over 2 years to finally break the 1,000 listener mark. And then it starts going up exponentially. I mean, there is kind of that hockey stick moment, I suppose, which I like to think I'm still on, where suddenly everything just starts going up, right? It's like a Facebook post. Actually, all of this, as far as making a podcast a big deal, all of it is very similar to like a Facebook post, to like that algorithm. And I don't know why it is this way, but that's just how it seems, is that now, unless you get out on some already very popular format, like I was able to, before I get into the hockey stick, I was able to beat the average amount of listeners, which again is less than 100 listeners per episode of a podcast. I was able to beat that average from episode 1 of Sovereign Tech because I was already a name on Free Talk Live. I was already a host on Free Talk Live. And because I was on LRN. I was on an affiliate. Okay. But, if you don't have that, I mean, you're in for an uphill battle. My example with the Facebook post is that for a lot of people to beat the algorithm, and in this case, we're going to talk about the algorithm of life, but for allegory, I'm mentioning a Facebook post. To beat the algorithm, you have to get like 20, 30 people liking your post. And then suddenly the algorithm will let all your other friends, even though they're your friends, because again, the newsfeed doesn't show everything. Then suddenly people will notice, and then you'll get into 50 likes, 60, 70, whatever. It just keeps going uphill. The more likes it gets, the bigger it beats the system, as it were, and becomes. But that's the real challenge, is that how do you get those initial 30 likes? Just as an example, so that you can bring in everybody else. I don't really have like a super great answer for that. And that kind of sucks. I mean, ironically, the best thing you can do, I think, if you were to start off, is you either have to, and I hate doing shows with guests, so this is going to be ironic, but you either have to appear on somebody else's show and sound interesting to people, and then they'll go and look at your show, which has happened to me many times. Or, you can have people from other shows on your show, and then hopefully they share your show, which I also had the fortune of that happening a while back. Is like in my 10th episode, I had Mike Elgin on, which I didn't mind having him on as a guest at all. That was a real honor because he's a journalistic hero of mine. We're going to talk about heroes later, but anyway. So that's tough. To break into that. There are ways that you might want to quote unquote cheat that system. Like there are ways, I think, I don't know exactly what to tell you, like how to get somebody, how to get more people to really come in and then share it and all that. And understand that too. People just generally do not share podcasts. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't matter how big your show is. Usually people just don't share it. But what I would do is I think what a lot of people look for when they see a new podcast show up, okay, is that they are looking for, they want it to seem like it's a big deal when maybe it's not. Now, I don't want you to fake it till you make it, but I think there's little tricks you could do that might give you an edge. I'll give you one example, okay? And I've theorized this in the past, and I'm going to start using it, and I'll let you people know about it. So I'm going to let you in on a secret project that I have going on because I am starting a new podcast. Sovereign Tech is going full bore. There's nothing stopping Sovereign Tech, but I am starting a shorter podcast. It's a podcast that's going to come out weekly. It's 30 minutes a piece, okay, or it's 30 minutes an episode, and the show is called CobraCast. Now I'm serious. I am making this podcast, okay, and I'll let you Patreon subscribers know. I am separating it. Other than mentioning it to you, it is something so separate from Sovereign Tech. Like I don't even know if I'm ever going to mention it on Sovereign Tech. If I do, it'll be an afterthought. Okay, but I am making a show called CobraCast. And here's my launch idea. And maybe this will very succinctly answer your question about how would I start a podcast? Because we got into, the reasons, whatever reasons you have are totally valid. I think the best reason is because your ideas aren't being represented. Another great reason might be that, if you want to do a guest type show, to where you have guests on all the time, maybe it's because there's great voices out there that aren't getting highlighted and that you want to interview and that you want to get them out there yourself. That's fine too. Understand, I think it's a little, before I get into the rest of the CobraCast, I know I'm all over the place. That's the nature of these Q&As. Okay. If you're having a guest on, okay, you don't have to pay the guest. Some people in the past have offered to pay me to be on the show, even as something as like $50 or something. I think it's when you're using a guest to like build up, your show, especially when your show is new. I don't think it's shitty because a lot of shows, function that way. I don't know, something kind of feels off about it because you're really taking that person's time. They are bringing their audience in many ways to you for free. And so I have guests ask me to be on. There are people that I do ask to be on. And I, well, how to get into that? That's a very complex issue. Just be conscientious. I guess that's the only point I want to bring up is be conscientious of the fact that, especially if it's somebody that has like an audience, that you are in many ways kind of, you're taking up their time. And you might want to offer to compensate them for that. It's okay if you don't. I'm just saying, I think that's something that has to, with podcasting becoming, podcasting, in my opinion, is still in its early days. I know there's podcasts that have been around for over a decade, but it is really still in the very early days. And figuring out how to monetize podcasts, how to, get podcasts being taken more seriously and all this, all of those things are still getting, worked out, as we speak. But I mean, with guests, I think you can ask Jeffrey Tucker to be on and he'll be on anything and he just doesn't care. He just shows up and talks and he's a great talker. There's some other guys like that where they'll just show up. I mean, I get asked to be on shows. I don't expect payment, and largely, especially if I know the people, like I'm happy to be on the show, and I'm happy to help them grow because as I've always said, I mean, there's a lot of people that knock the idea of, that's all we need is another podcast, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I understand that. I understand why people feel that way. But like when you consider that most podcasts are status bullshit, like, I think it's perfectly fine to have another Liberty podcast out there. I mean, I really think that's just A-okay. So have as many of them as you want. So anyway, okay, let's get back to CobraCast. So this is I am telling you my entire launch plan for this podcast. So this is literally how I would do it if I was starting a new podcast. So I am starting off with CobraCast. First off, to explain what it is, and you might laugh, but I'll explain a little better. Well, what it's all about. CobraCast is literally a podcast about the G.I. Joe universe. Okay. Now, the first thing that people ask me about when I mention this, because I've mentioned it to a few friends, and I've been working on it for months, okay? They say, wait, what? Weren't you in the military? Don't you hate the military? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I know. But that's why it's called CobraCast, because it's about Cobra. It's not about G.I. Joe. It's taking this this franchise, this universe. And I'm not going to concentrate on the toys, really, but it's taking this franchise in this universe and looking at it from the villain's perspective, okay, which there are very few podcasts of any of that type out there, okay? It is not a Liberty podcast at all. Not one stitch is a Liberty podcast. If somehow people look me up, after subscribing to CobraCast, and they find Sovereign Tech and they become anarchists because of Sovereign Tech or something, fucking great, okay? But that's not what this podcast is about. And I mean that. That's great. I'm honored, okay? So CobraCast, again, is this really, it's more than just G.I. Joe. It's about the entire Hasbro universe because right now, the Hasbro universe, the toy company, is bringing all of their universes together. Like IDW, the comic book company, right now is taking Action Man, Micronauts, Mask is the acronym, the 80s car show, and ROM, which, man, badass. ROM, G.I. Joe, Transformers, they're putting them all together into one universe. Kind of like how you have, the Marvel universe or the DC universe and all that. And so that's what this podcast is going to be about, is the entire Hasbroverse, as I'm calling it. There's going to be movies coming out and all that, and I'm going to have guests on. I'm going to, do interviews and all of this, about the show. So what am I doing as far as the and again, it's short. Now, that might be the first thing, that might be another thing to bring up, is that I think a lot of people today are not looking for a 2-hour experience. I get more feedback from people who honestly never even listen to Sovereign Tech. So, it's debatable how much I want to listen to them. But I get more feedback about people saying that they don't have time to listen to a 2-hour podcast. Then that might be the number one reason people don't listen to Sovereign Tech, is because it's 2 hours. And maybe they just can't believe that one person can actually do a 2-hour show completely on their own with no guests and no help really. But for whatever reason, they don't listen to it. So I think that, here's the first tip. Make the show or second or third tip, make the show on the shorter side. Okay. Make it a shorter episode, or, do 30 minutes, maybe 45. I wouldn't go over an hour. In fact, if you could do a 15-minute show, kind of like Jake DeSilva's The Voluntary Life, which I love that show. If you can do 10, 15, 20 minutes, oh man, I think you're guaranteed a much larger audience just because of the shortness of the show. So anyway, CobraCast, because of that in mind, and because I can be so verbose, I can talk so goddamn much, I'm doing 30 minutes. That was like my hard limit. Okay. So the other part of that is that, like Sovereign Tech, I will do it in a pre-recorded format. Pre-recorded means is that I have a template. I use Audacity, okay? And if you're going to get into podcasting, I 100% recommend that you use Audacity as your audio mixing software, okay? It is the best, and it is cross-platform. It's available on practically everything. Unless like you're in the Apple universe, okay, and you have an iPad and you're going to use the iPad or iPhone with GarageBand, and you're connecting like your microphone through a lightning port or something like that. That's very different than, of course, use GarageBand. Okay, but GarageBand is the only software I'd recommend outside of Audacity if you're going to make a podcast. Now, what I can do with Audacity is that, like, I have the interstitials, okay? I have the intros, the beds and the ads and all this stuff. All of that is on a preset template that doesn't have me recording anything. It just has all my interstitials, okay, which are like the little the story segments that introduced each segment of the show. And you don't have to do segments either. I think that differentiates a show. It gives the show structure and keeps you orderly, but it's not something you have to do. So with these interstitials and all that, again, they're already preset at preset times, and you can move them as you need to. If you need to stop in the middle of a thought and say, oh shit, I'm out of time, and you move the segment over, you can do that. When I started Sovereign Tech, I didn't move them. I was like, nope, when I'm done talking about it, I am, when I set the limits, like this segment's going to be 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that's the end of it. If I didn't get something out, well, fuck, I didn't get it out. Or maybe I could talk about it for 30 seconds at the beginning of the next segment, but that's it. Now, you don't have to do segments, okay? But I think having that preset time really does, help you kind of hone in, on what you're saying in all of this. So I would do that. I would have a preset template, and it also helps you build your own craft, because you may get asked, if your podcast ends up doing very well, or if you're trying to, just market it and schlep it around, you may get asked to be on other podcasts, which is kind of the initial way to do marketing. I know you asked about marketing as well. And if you do so, you want to be able to talk good, because they might not edit. They might not believe in editing. They might not believe in, making you sound good, which there's a lot of shows that feel that way. I don't like to edit my guests. I give them the option. I said, look, if you really want me to edit it, I will. But I prefer not to, because honestly, if somebody doesn't sound intelligent, I don't want to make them sound good. If someone sounds like, a dunce, I'd like that to be on display. As to where if you edit it, sometimes people can sound smarter than perhaps they are, or perhaps that they did, whatever. So I'm not big one. I'm not a big one for editing either. I like the natural, making it sound like podcasting is such a personal thing, right? Podcasting is you are literally in somebody's head, in a very real way. And so if I can make it sound like I'm just talking to you and we're just walking down the street or whatever, I mean, obviously I add in some fun things here and there, but I like that style. That's how I enjoy things, and understand I copied a lot of my, shows that I really liked. Like I took bits and pieces from that. Like I mentioned Security Now earlier. I've taken bits and pieces from how they do things and implemented it into my show. Okay. So that's how you can do a structure. But like I said, I think a shorter podcast is going to get you a lot more traction than a longer one. Maybe, years down the line, after you've got thousands or maybe even millions of listeners, you could consider, you could consider maybe expanding the show. But I would keep it short. Originally, Sovereign Tech was only an hour. But I couldn't get everything out inside of an hour, so I had to do 2 hours. It went up to like an hour and a half, then an hour 45, and then I'm like, oh shit, I got to do 2 hours. Okay. So anyway, all right. So enough about that. Now, how would I go about launching CobraCast? Because I have a few tricks that I want to make it look kind of bigger than it is. So first off, the great thing is that there aren't really any other shows out there concentrating on what CobraCast is all about. There are other franchises I would have rather concentrated on than G.I. Joe, but it just happened to be the one that had something big going on for it, and that there really aren't any other podcasts out there for it. Like, I think doing a Star Wars podcast is just stupid. I don't think Star Wars podcasts themselves are dumb. I think doing one is, maybe not the brightest move. Okay, because there's so many, and it's so hard to differentiate your voice. When there's so much in the field like that. And that's something to consider too, is that, if you're going, a lot of successful podcasts are usually niche podcasts. Okay. So you want to find your niche. Everybody knows that. Every entrepreneurial, whatever talks about that, find your niche and then you'll make money, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Right. So anyway, but do find your niche, but understand that if you are niche, there is a hard limit of how many people usually are within a niche, how many people are interested in a niche. So that's why I got into, that's why I was like, okay, the G.I. Joe universe is not something being covered, so I want to look into that. My reason for doing it is partly, I do read all of the Hasbroverse content. It does interest me. I don't like G.I. Joe. I like Cobra. I genuinely like Cobra. Which, understand, Cobra is an anarchist organization. It's actually in the name. That's what the A stands for, is anarchy in the name Cobra. Well, that's kind of an urban legend, but anyway. My reasons for doing it is I do want it to turn into a money-making podcast down the line. I do want it to be, because geek podcasts, like podcasts about geeky subjects, do end up they get huge fan bases generally very quickly, and they can make money. So now in the light of how do I make money off of doing that, this gets into how do I set up, the show. So 3 things. Here's kind of the unholy trinity of what I think a podcast needs. And one of them is even debatable. Okay. But you want to put it on SoundCloud. I'll tell you that right now, because you will not have, other than there was a huge clusterfuck earlier this year with the SoundCloud RSS feeds. It was really bad. There is no other podcast service out there that gives you, that offers the amount of value, the amount of integration, the amount of sharing ability, and just the quality of presentation that SoundCloud allows for. Now, it costs $15 a month, okay, to have a pro account, but it is so worth it. And honestly, if you're not willing to lay out $15 a month for your podcast, then question how serious of a podcast you're making here. At that point, then you can go on Blog Talk Radio, because I don't know how seriously you want to take it. But I think that's a great way to go, is to go with SoundCloud, because SoundCloud, for years with Sovereign Tech, SoundCloud was the homepage for Sovereign Tech. And that's all I had, because you can put little links on the side of, if you go to sovereigntech.com right now, you can see there's a banner that can, talk about, that has artwork for your show. You can put in the show art. There's, you can actually, if the listeners have SoundCloud accounts as well, they can message you right through SoundCloud. They can comment on each sound. So you already have, kind of a discus platform. You already have a comments platform built into it. On the right-hand side, you can put in custom links for, your social media pages, or maybe if you get sponsors, which, understand, usually you can't get like a paying sponsor. Like, I have paying sponsors that, that pay me, every month or 3 months or a year or 6 months, whatever, to advertise on Sovereign Tech. Okay. But it took me years to get to that, to where I had the listener base to say to them, this is how many people I reach. Here is the consistency, which I have absolute consistency. Here's the consistency within which an episode comes out. So you're not going to lose anything. So when I say to a sponsor, I am going to, you're going to get inside of 6 months, you're going to get such and so many, ads. You're going to get 24 or 28, however many it adds up to. Okay. I can guarantee that, and my history shows, and you can look at my history. Okay. So before you go after sponsors, you want to kind of have a track record, and you want to have a listener base worthy of getting a sponsorship as well, which I would recommend, trying to get to at least 4,000 or 5,000 people before you start reaching out to sponsors. Okay. So anyway, so the SoundCloud page can show off all that. It could really be your homepage. Now you can have a website besides, so that's number one, is the SoundCloud page. And they let you you can upload, as long as you're not doing like a daily show that's 3 hours a piece. And I mean daily as in 7 days a week. A pro account will get you by just fine. There are limits on how much audio you can upload to SoundCloud. But anyway, I think SoundCloud is just so rock solid. It's the best podcast platform out there. I think most of the serious podcasts use it. And really, when other shows are a big deal on other systems, they're big fish in a small pond, in my opinion. Okay, so take some of those metrics with a grain of salt at times. I don't mean to take anything away from them. I'm just saying take them for what they are. Okay. Wow, I'm spending 45 minutes on this. I apologize. I'm going to get to the other questions no matter what. All right. So, so you got SoundCloud. Next thing you want to do is the second part of this unholy trinity of how to start a podcast. And that is a website. Okay. Now, you may not, if you want to do a website, I recommend going with WordPress. WordPress is very easy to learn. Of course, please use Namecheap if you're going to do all of this. You could get away with not having that website. But, some people will talk about this. Here's some advantages, disadvantages, okay? You can have a website. That way, if anything ever happens to SoundCloud, you can let people know what's going on. You could have if you're using a WordPress website, there is what's called Blueberry or Blueberry PowerPress, whatever. That allows you to actually host podcasts on your website itself, and you don't have to use SoundCloud at all. I think there are certain advantages and disadvantages to this. One is that if your show ends up getting really big, your website plan that you have, your hosting plan or whatever, maybe it's like a shared hosting, and that's really the only way to do it where I think it's worth the money, okay, where it's like, $25 every 3 months or something. Your website may not be able to handle the traffic of, like, say, if you get like that one viral episode. Okay, so I think that's one issue to consider is that hosting it on your website itself might run into some problems. The other thing is that a lot of times when you're hosting a podcast on a website itself, it really doesn't look very professional. Like in my opinion, it doesn't look half as good as when you take from SoundCloud, you can get the embed code, including for a WordPress website. If you still wanted to have, like I have zog.ninja where I post everything too. Okay, including with that website, you can embed, like the SoundCloud player, and it looks great. And you can do it in different sizes and everything. You can show off the show art and all this stuff. I mean, like it's so worth it. So you could have an independent website. I'm going to give you a couple tips on that though. First off is that as much over the years as I thought that, well, I I think the indie web still matters. You don't want to rely on third-party services and all of that. You want to have your own website, blah, blah, blah. I still think to some degree that's largely true. But the reality that I have come to is that people are just always going to go to third-party services. They're always going to use Facebook. They're always going to use Twitter. And that's always where they're going to go first. So you want to make sure whatever you're doing is available in these areas first. Okay? And SoundCloud is top-notch for that. People will not come to you. They really will not go to your website. No matter how many features you put on that website, they are not going to go to that. You are especially if you're just starting out, you want to be in on various third-party services. That doesn't mean that you can't have a website as a backup. That's a fine idea, okay? But you're going to want to take advantage of these third-party services. Now, SoundCloud, I think, is a little bit different. It's a little different than it's not just relying because if that's your main thing, that's where all of your podcast jewels are resting. Okay, you are paying for that, and so I think it's very different as to where if Facebook or if YouTube. Or if Twitter or whatever, if they took down your podcasts, I don't think you have any room to complain. I mean, it sucks, sure. It's the nature of the beast. It's the nature of these third-party systems, okay? But I don't think you really have any room to complain because you didn't pay a dime. Okay, so you want, so I think, having SoundCloud as your back end is just one of the best things you can do because it integrates with all of those services really well. And you're paying for it. So I think that if they ever did start taking things down on you, if they ever did cause some kind of trouble, or whatever, you have room to complain and to do something about it. Okay, you might have a more legal course of action to take on. So the website, not such a big deal. I do recommend, even if you don't do a website, if you don't do a full-on website, that you get a domain name from Namecheap. Like sovereigntech.com right now, I switch where it sends you to. Sometimes I have it, for years I had to go to the website, to zog.ninja website. For years I've had it go to SoundCloud, right to the SoundCloud page. I may change it to where it goes to the Patreon page. But that's the nice thing. If you have a domain name that is separate, that's not necessarily used for hosting, it's not your hosting domain name, it's just a separate domain name. That can be really handy because then that can lead people to wherever you need them to go. And if something does go wrong, you could set up a message somewhere or a landing page or a blog post or something that explain what happened to your podcast. And people could just enter in that URL and they would end up, at that blog post or wherever you want to redirect people to. So that's a really key thing to have. So even if you don't want to do a website, have the domain name. Okay, now, second part of that. With Gmail, okay, or with email in general. A lot of podcasts use Gmail as their email address, and I mean even some big ones, like Collider, which is one of the biggest, YouTube networks out there. To email Collider, you use collidernews@gmail.com. A part of me thinks that's ridiculous, okay? If you want to be taken seriously, you really want to have, in @myshow.com, whatever it happens to be. I mean, that's how I feel about it. You want to have something other than Gmail because anybody can make a Gmail account. And that's part of the thing with having SoundCloud, with having, the URL, with the custom URL, the custom domain name, with having an email address and all that, you want to make people, if you want people to listen, I think they need to see that it's serious. That you take it seriously, that you put money into this sort of thing. That it's not just somebody, yakking away, on their laptop microphone. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that either. I'm just saying that if you're looking to, these are ways to get an audience. Okay, now, the third part of the unholy trinity, all right, which is, I kind of doubled up with the website. The website, email address, and domain name and all that, that's one part of that unholy trinity. The third part is Patreon. Now, this is new. And in some ways, you may be able to just use Patreon. Here's a secret. Patreon allows you to, as long as the file's no larger than 100 megabytes, Patreon allows you to integrate allows you to just host, as long as you get, I don't know if there's a limit on how many donors that you get, how many patrons you have, before they allow for this, because it's kind of hard to believe that they'd allow for it right out of the gate, but maybe they do. I haven't really tested it. Okay, but as long as your file is no larger than 100 megabytes, which, by the way, SovereignTech records on a variable bit rate, it's like 96K. Okay, so if you're wondering about sound quality, that's what I do. It's like that 96 to 120 range or whatever. It's number 6 on Audacity if you use that. Okay, so in a 2-hour show ends up being about 69 megs. Okay, so as long as you're under 100 megs, you can upload directly to Patreon an episode and have it hosted there, and then share that post around. Okay, so theoretically it could do everything that a website does and that SoundCloud does. In fact, it even hosts, and it could potentially be hosting for free. Even if you have to have at least one patron, just ask a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever, to be that $1 patron or something per month. Okay, and have them. That way you could make use of that. I mean, that's so cheap. But they do. They effectively do free hosting, and that has a social media component to it. I talked about it on other Q&A episodes. Everything that Patreon allows for. Okay, but that's what I would do on Patreon, and then follow Patreon's. Patreon has a bunch of different posts on how to get your Patreon project noticed, and follow those accordingly. Make the great video that introduces it. Do all this different stuff. I kind of went into Patreon through the back door, as it were, because SovereignTech was already a big deal before it became a presence on Patreon. So take full advantage of Patreon. Have, maybe at first you don't have to do it, but from maybe the first episode, start mentioning that you're going to have Patreon only content. Okay. And that way you could start making money very early on with the show. It could be extended interviews. There's all kinds of ideas that you could do as far as that goes, but make Patreon a part of your podcast launch strategy right from the beginning. You may be able to do your entire podcast from Patreon itself. You might not need SoundCloud. You might not need a website. I still recommend getting that domain name, the custom domain name, and the custom private email that works with that domain name of whatever your show happens to be. Okay, I still recommend that. But maybe you could just do it all through Patreon. I am not doing CobraCast through all of Patreon. CobraCast will have a website eventually. It's not going to be there at launch. CobraCast does have a custom URL or a custom domain name already. It does have a custom email already. It's whatever at CobraCast, blah, blah, blah. But I am going to be doing it on SoundCloud. And I'm going to be doing it on, have it on Patreon and have, that's how that's going to start off. So, but eventually there will be a full website too. Just that's taking a lot of time. So that, obviously I have a Twitter. You want to have a Twitter. You got to have a Twitter. Okay. You don't have to have a Facebook. SovereignTech doesn't have a Facebook account. There's I have an account. Okay. But you don't have to have, a Facebook page for what you do. I do not post on Google Plus anymore. Maybe you'll find it worthwhile to do that because it supposedly gives you some degree of greater rankings in Google. But I don't know how much Google is still being used for search. I think search, you're going to get a better hit off of having that great domain name than you would off of, I don't know, whatever you're doing for, whatever you're doing on Google Plus. I don't think Google Plus that's not an area I would concentrate on at all. I would concentrate on Twitter, and if you want to, on Facebook. That's up to you. Okay. So that that's how I would start things off. With a podcast. I keep it short. The SoundCloud website and Patreon, and the email address, the domain name, all of that. And I think you're ending up with a really great podcast, at that point. That is how I would start one up. I would have a monetization strategy right from the get-go, and Patreon is just the best one. I don't think you're going to make money off of, you can set up a Bitcoin wallet as well. Obviously that just makes sense to do. But I don't think you are going to attract anybody just because you accept Bitcoin. I mean, that it's a fine thing. It's a fine, community, quote unquote, to reach out to. But, as far as like people being on board with a Bitcoin podcast anymore, that ship has sailed. And as I understand it, a lot of Bitcoin podcasters are fading out and they are burnt out. And they're done doing it, and they are walking away. And there's so much news. Like, I don't know how you could possibly contain like a Bitcoin show. I don't get it. So anyway, that's not to say that Bitcoin isn't still a thing. Of course, it's not going anywhere, and I'm glad. I'm just saying that, like, I don't know that you're going to reach people just because you have a Bitcoin address. Okay, but have it available. Mention it and all that, and I think that's great. But Patreon is really your best way to go as far as with all that. So, I hope I covered all of got into all of that. Q&A. Oh no, you know what? Okay, so I didn't tell you some tricks. Here are some other tricks to do, especially when you're starting out as a show. You like Q&A, listener interaction is hugely important. Okay. Now, I'm not going to tell you to lie. All right. But I am going to tell you what some people do to make their shows seem larger. All right. One of them that I'm doing with CobraCast is, and this one I think is harmless, but it's interesting. Like I said, you want to make it seem like your podcast is really taken seriously. And one trick I'm going to do is I'm going to make the first episode of CobraCast is going to be number 156. It's going to be episode 156 and then the title of the episode. I am starting it off numbered at 156. Okay. Now, why am I doing that? Because I am creating the kind of the illusion that the podcast, and I'm really just being funny, but I'm curious to see how this works, and you're welcome to try it as well. But I am creating the illusion that the podcast has been around forever. And I am not going to talk about the first episode like it's a first episode. Okay, I'm not going to lie to anybody, but this is a trick that I'm trying to pull off. And there's a significance in G.I. Joe to number 156, but that's for the fans. Okay, so that's something you might want to try. Maybe do a funny numbering system, to make it seem like you've been around for a while and all that. I've heard people say, I've heard like Apple, when Apple features a podcast on iTunes, they specifically say that, that numbering actually hurts your listenership because it makes people think that they'd have to get too invested. They'd have to invest too much time in getting caught up with your podcast. I don't believe that. And also that's another thing I've learned is that iTunes, for whatever reason, still seems to be a big deal. It still seems to be the way to get, recognized and all that. So if you want, you can ask people to, to comment on, on your iTunes, leave reviews on iTunes. Apparently that's still a thing. I've never relied on that. I've never really even asked for it. So it's not something that, and I don't, with CobraCast, like that'll be a different story. That is something that where, I will make the mention, check, leave a review on iTunes and all this stuff. So that's still something, really to consider there. So the other trick is, and let's just put it this way. I know of podcasts, a lot of them that do this. When they're first starting out and they have a question and answer section, okay, like I said, there's a lot of podcasts that do this. They make up the questions, okay? That is up to you on how you feel about doing that, all right? And I'm just going to leave it at that, all right? I'm not going to judge you. I'm just saying that that's what some podcasts do. Another thing podcasts do, here's another one, is that they buy followers for their social media accounts, okay? I'm not here to judge you. I'm just saying that I know for a fact, actually, a couple of shows that have absolutely done that, and it pisses me off. But it doesn't piss me off. My apologies, because if you do it, you do it. I feel like I feel like there's some degree of disingenuous in that, in doing so. But that's something for you to consider. Again, this is all about making your show look a lot more serious. Okay. Other than that, I think that about covers it. If you have more specific questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. But I think that's a very interesting intro. I probably talked way too long about it. I have other questions I'm going to get into here. And I appreciate that question. And I gave you the dirty tricks at the end. You could be the dirtiest player in the game, baby. Woo! Right. But why don't let's get into the other questions, because I think that these are actually really interesting questions. So let's get into the sex robots. How about that? I'll read the question here. Let's see. This was actually part of like a multi-question thing that I've been picking off of here and there. Thoughts? ? I think sex bots for men could be as big as the contraceptive pill was for women. It could revolutionize the game significantly. Okay, and that is the entirety of the question. So we'll do that, and then I'm going to get into a philosophical question. Sex robots are, in my opinion, they are a reality, and they're going to be a reality. They are a reality in Japan already. Pardon me while I take a sip of my cup. And don't do that either. Unless you're doing it for stylistic points, don't go having a drink in the middle of an episode. They'll hear it. Anyway, yes, sex robots are, like I said, they're a reality, and they're going to be even more of a reality around the world. And they are, just by the nature of, not the nature, but by the nurture of the planet, they are largely going to be female sex robots. I think that's going to be a thing. Do I think that this will revolutionize things for men? That is a specific question. I'll go into broader gender, matters here in a second. Yes, it is going to do that. If people want to build sex robots, by all means, rock and roll, you go for it, okay? If other genders want to make sex robots, by all means, go for it. There is going to be big business. There are going to be lucrative deals made, most likely, for sex robots that look like various stars, various actors, various celebrities, and all that. That's going to be a thing. I think, an area, and this is just a side note, an area where I think sex robots are actually going to be far more prevalent, I think, is going to be virtual reality, because the amount of money you have to spend on building an actual robot, it can get cheaper over time as it becomes more popular, and it will be popular. I think it's just far more practical to sell people suits that simulate, a lot of sexual things, but it's all Lawnmower Man style stuff, like where you have, a VR suit effectively that simulates, the action of, that there's a sexual partner there or whatever. I think that is the place where I would more spend my money. Not on sex robots, but on VR. I mean, because in VR, understand that people will probably buy one of the biggest places that's going to sell sex robots. I don't even think it's going to be just for single men, because I think that's when initially people think, oh, those fucking losers are going to be, and I'm not calling you losers. I'm just saying that's the conventional thought, I think, on the matter. But I think married couples are going to buy sex robots in gangbusters, pun intended. I absolutely think that's going to be a fact. That people are going to be able to have three-ways without emotional concerns. Now, depending on how advanced these robots are, there's an ethical question to be had there as far as do they have emotional concerns? Okay, I know I'm not going down that road right now. Okay, that's a subject for another time. You can ask me about it if you want me to talk about it. Okay, but I think that's going to be the big part of the industry. But VR could pull that off too, to where you and your wife could both wear a VR headset, and you could, your entire bedroom could become, an orgy scene out of Conan the Barbarian. I am excited for that technology. I will tell you that straight up. But I'm excited in the way that I get to experience. Here's my caveat on the sex robot matter. Okay, is that I am excited for that. I am excited for the ability to share the experience with another real person. The idea of me owning a sex robot and me being a single guy does not excite me. It's okay if it excites you. I'm not judging you here. Okay, I'm just saying for me, it doesn't meet my needs. Now, could I picture having, fun with a sex robot with, maybe a friend of some sort, or with a, lover and all of that? Absolutely. I mean, just absolutely. And there's great potential for sex robots being an educational tool. This is something that, a lot of sex educators talk about, ones that are actually worth their salt, not the ones that, also teach a science class in high school. But, they talk about, sex ed or health class, whatever, in school is usually just like reproductive training. That's all it is. It's all about, okay, this is how you end up having a baby. It is nothing to do with sex as being a social construct, which is what it co-evolved as, along with procreation, and has nothing to do like with your own pleasure and with pleasure in general. It's just all like these really sterile safety tips and what to do as far as like when something goes wrong or how this happens, blah blah blah. It's really not sex education. I could see sex robots being just totally changing that game, and I think that's a fine thing. I don't really see any problem with that. Sex robots could put prostitution like that. That could make prostitution maybe go out the window, unless, and this gets into, not that I'm looking for prostitutes. I'm just saying this gets into why sex robots really don't do it for me, and that is that there is this, and people could say, well, you could program this into a sex robot. Yeah, maybe. Okay, but I think there's this randomness. There's this potential that someone is going to come up with something, okay, where, like, say, with a real human partner, sexual partner, there is, what could happen is that, like, I think I talked about it last week a little bit, that, what makes the human brain so amazing is that it can make logical leaps. Not that it leaps outside of logic, though plenty of people do that. But in that it can go, it can, instead of going A, B, C, D, E, which is likely what the sex robot would do, it can go from A straight to N. And it can just skip ahead and come up with this ingenious thing that you would have never thought was hot. And if anybody told you about it, perhaps even, you wouldn't have thought it was hot. But when you see it happen, when you're there, when you're in the moment, holy shit, that's amazing. Like just this totally new idea could come out because of the way that the human brain works. Okay, so there's that randomosity, the unexpected, perhaps even a degree of mystery that comes in when you have a fully human, partner that has their own volition and all this. That excites me. The creativity that can come out of another human being, that excites me. Now, you can say that, you could program sex robots to do the same thing, to be creative and perhaps like at times to not listen to what you have to say. But I still think at the end of the day, there won't even be 2 points. One is that there won't be that full appreciation for the creativity because you are automatically thinking in your head, unless you're, I don't know, unless you're one of the normies, you're automatically thinking in your head, this was programmed to do that. And I think that kind of kills some of the sexiness of the matter. And then also, there is, again, I don't think that any AI, and I think this is true going forward, I'm 99% convinced that AIs are not capable of doing those logical leaps like humans can, logical leaps in creativity and in creation. And so I still think, that sex with a human with another human being will always be top notch. Like that'll always be the best. Just my thought on it. I am not judging anybody for doing it differently. If people want to masturbate. And if you have a sex robot that it helps you out with that then fuck, go for it. I think that's totally fine. You really can't, ethical questions aside of like, when does an artificial intelligence, become something that is deserving of liberties? That whole argument aside, okay, if you do not have a problem with masturbation, I think you are a hypocrite if you have a problem with sex robots. That doesn't make any sense that you think masturbation's okay and you think sex robots are bad. But anyway, regardless. So I think human sex is always going to be the epitome. And in fact, there may be a lot of other aspects to that. There is, understand this, and I don't mean this to sound in any way woo-woo. I'm trying to keep this as scientific as possible. The human heart, I don't mean like, the soul or anything like that. I just mean like literally the pumping, beating heart inside of your chest. Generates an electromagnetic field. Low level, but it does. Okay. There are people who wonder if that electromagnetic field affects your brain. There are a bunch of, there's still a whole lot of research being done on all of this. But I wonder if in sex, there is, because of the extreme closeness involved in sexual intercourse, not just between man and woman, between woman and woman, man and man, however you make it up, okay? Because of the extreme closeness, that there may be certain biological processes, nothing spiritual, just biological processes that occur, that join perhaps, not to use the biblical term, but what the fuck, you become one flesh. And maybe in some way, some of these, like something as simple as the electromagnetic fields that your hearts produce somehow kind of collide. And there's a little something extra going on there. Or there's some other senses that are, kind of working with each other that a robot just, at least that I can't picture now because they're so little understood in a human, won't provide. Cannot provide. So yeah, I think it's going to change the game. I think they're going to be huge. I think they're going to be a big deal. I really don't have any problem with them, but I don't think they're for me. Not solely. They're to perhaps engage with sex robots or sex programs in VR with another human being, with another flesh and blood human being. Absolutely. I am so fucking on board for that. With multiple other flesh and blood human beings, let's rock it. Let's do this. Okay? I'm on board with that. But as far as it like being enough, it's not, it would not be the sexual goal that I would continually strive for. That's just me. I'm not knocking. I don't mean to knock anybody by saying that at all. But that's just my thought on it, because I think there's so much more. And I mean, what people appreciate are, some people appreciate certain ways. I mean, maybe in the BDSM scene, this could be huge, with sex robots, because here's something that, you don't even need safe words really, right? I mean, I'm not in the BDSM scene by any means. So, but I mean, maybe that's something where it is very appealing. I don't know, but it's not for me. So it's just that's my point, and I hope I explained why. But if it's for you, it's for you in rock and roll. So I do think they are going to change the game. I totally agree with the emailer on that. Anyway, okay, enough about sex robots, and I don't want this to go too much longer. Let's get to this next question. This is a great question. This is a historical / philosophical question. Hey, Brian, I've got a possibly very tough philosophical, historical, social, psychological question for you. In all of your research, have you ever come across an answer as to when, how, and or why the human psyche developed the need for heroes? I'm very curious at what point in human development what happened that made humans want to depend on, look up and give over their sovereignty to others in that particular way. Not just a temporary need to rely on someone else out of practicality, but to yearn for the other to come and save them or lead them. Would love to hear your thoughts and theories. Okay, wonderful, wonderful question. And, I don't think really anybody has like the 100% answer that they can really guarantee. Like, no, this is the fucking answer. But I do have a theory. And it's a theory really that comes down to, for me, really the start of any kind of tyranny. I think it's the start of all irrationality. And it's the start of religions, but I repeat myself. I know I have religious listeners, and obviously I appreciate you, and, you've dealt with me for years, so I assume when I say these things, you deal with them then too. I've mentioned this somewhat before, but I'm going to apply it, to this question as well. There's actually a few books that cover this topic, but maybe one of the most famous is The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. And the book is from 1970, written by John Allegro. And it is all about tracing really like the history of Christianity and how it goes back to, fertility cults in the ancient Near East, and really how the idea is that there was, that various mushrooms, psilocybin, whatever else, and this is kind of fitting based on what we were talking about in episode 190 of Sovereign Tech, but that mushrooms themselves are what really created like religion in general. And that is really the best answer that I can find for that whole thing. And the reason I say that, and there's been great talks, I can't think of his name. Richard, his blog is Free the Animal, I think. But he's talked about how, Paleolithic man or, our ancient ancestors, to survive, to make it as far as they did, to evolve as far as they did, they really had to have such a firm grasp on reality that any kind of superstition, any kind of supernaturalism would have wiped them out. It would have killed them. Like, you had to be in touch with reality. There's just no room for any of that stuff. And so the idea that, like how do we get from that kind of thinking to where we have to be in touch with reality or we die, to how do we get to religions and how do we get to government, states, and all this? I think at some point, somebody ate some fucking mushrooms and then started describing things that, just started describing concepts and whatever else, like they started seeing, colors in the sky, or like everything was topsy-turvy, the whole world was spinning and all this. They started describing like a lot of creative, what could be considered creative, ideas that nobody had ever heard before. And they started describing these things. And I think that the people around them, the tribe around them, just saw them to be like, whoa, they're in touch with something else. Like, wow, how did they come up with that and all? Because we know that for Paleolithic humans, art was a big deal. As much as you need to be in touch with reality, and their art really reflected their basic, ability to reflect reality on cave walls. Okay, they weren't drawing flights of fancy. Like the oldest art we have is of people fucking, is of fertility, and is all this different stuff. Stuff very much based in reality. Your old art never, ever shows like angels. I mean, sometimes you see some weird things, but, then you just have to ask, okay, what exactly did they see? And we're talking about like ant people and, in North Native American caves and, all these other different things. That's another story, okay? But the point being is that their art largely reflected their world, as to where when you consider, like when you consider the medieval times, or you consider Rome, or you consider, the Renaissance and all that. A lot of that, even though the Renaissance would go on to get back in touch with reality, a lot of the artwork at the time reflected things that weren't real. It reflected angels and all this different stuff. And so that's my point, is that, I think what happened is that these people, ancient humans were so awestruck with whatever these people that took some kind of psychedelics, took some kind of mushrooms, whatever, that they thought, they're just like, wow, what was this? What did you experience here? Tell me more. This is amazing. And then the person would start drawing the shit on the wall and they'd be like, we never thought about that. This is incredible. And I think what would happen is that these people, these ancient humans on shrooms, effectively, started warning them about ideas like primitive ideas of demons that weren't really there. But they started saying, oh no, I saw it right here. And the way that the person described it was just so was like they really experienced it, because through, the trip that they're on, they did experience it, even though it's not reality. That people have said, oh, wow, I don't know what you're seeing, but we need to, Protect us, protect us. And this is how it started, is the heroism, the idea of, the great man theory, all these different things, I think really started with the first priesthoods. And the first priesthoods started out of somebody taking some kind of psychedelic, be it shrooms or whatever. And to take it the next step, why wouldn't they just kill the person that, this one person of the tribe that was saying all this crazy shit? Because maybe then that person would share the shroom with another guy, but that person might die from it. Maybe it was the wrong shroom or something like that. However all that worked out. We could guess, ad infinitum about how exactly that happened. But, only some people could handle the trip, others couldn't. Or maybe they'd fall off a cliff for what they were doing, for the trip that they're on, or, whatever they're experiencing. So there were, suddenly you have this very special person. So I think that's really where heroism started. That's really where governments and all this kind of started. And I'm going to go further in a second, okay, and explain more on that. But I want to make this really clear. Humans are, in many ways, they're individuals, but in many ways they are tribal creatures when they are trying to survive. And there is nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. Okay, tribalism, we got to be really clear with terms. Tribalism is totally, natural for whatever, and you got to be careful when you use the word natural. But I think tribalism is totally natural. However, shamanism is not. And I think they're two different things. I think a lot of times, even when, some authors that in many ways I respect, like Ayn Rand or whatever, they talk about tribalism, or even Hoppe or whoever, all these different people talk about tribalism. I think they confuse the idea of humans working in concert to survive as a tribe and humans being, scared and awed and worshiping some shaman in their group that maybe, went on a shroom trip. And if I'm using the wrong terms as far as drugs, look, folks, I don't do them. So, okay, I don't know. I'm not in that culture. and it's fine if you are. I'm just saying. So what you end up with, so understand that humans were naturally tribal. But then when, this priestly class comes in, due to what I think they were experiencing things outside of reality, not that there's anything actually outside of reality, but what they described, they thought they saw outside of reality, then you end up with shamanism. And that's a problem. And shamanism is where, now this leads us to the next part of our story, okay? Because I think what happened is that shamans were describing this thing that was not under human control. It really wasn't under their control, other than it was under their control when they could experience it based upon what they were ingesting. When they started ingesting these shrooms or whatever, I think that's when they started coming up with this ethereal concept of animism and then eventually of God or gods. Now, humans have no real control over that. And what I think happened later on is that you end up with, say in the Bible, okay, you end up with the character of Nimrod, who was the creator of Babylon, okay, or of Babel, which became Babylon. And Nimrod, they talk about how he was this great hunter. And eventually he became a great king and a great leader and all that. It actually kind of talks about him glowingly. But what happens is that when you get into works that are just, slightly external of the Bible, like the works of Josephus, Flavius Josephus, who was a Jew, a Roman Jew in the 1st century CE, he talks about the story of Nimrod and says that Nimrod made himself out to be God and replaced God. And he knew he needed to do that to continue his tyranny, to build Babylon, to continue Babylon. And so what happened is that, the trick kind of came full circle. Is that, well, now people believe in gods because of this priestly class that had been around. Now I, Nimrod, or whatever leader, am going to claim to be the representative or that God itself. And, but why did people accept that? Why did people, why, they accepted it. Literally governments came in and replaced God. And a lot of people talk about this, how atheists, their religion is the state. Yeah, that kind of happens. And that's always happened. For thousands of years, that's happened. What we really got to do is get rid of all the spooks. The God, the religion, and the state. Right? But anyway, that happened because people were primed to believe that there was this God, and then suddenly it got a lot more exciting when their king, or their pharaoh or whatever became that God. Then, now we have reality and the unreal. We've got it all going on. And then, of course, that's why, throughout Egyptian history, you had constant battles between the pharaoh and the priests. Because the priests were the ones, who carried on this ancient lineage of telling people all the woo-woo shit that's not really there, but when they when they're tripping on something, they can describe it, and nobody ever thought of it before, so they must believe that it's real. And then the pharaoh, who claims to be God. And I mean, you just had this constant battle where the priests would tell people what to do, and then the pharaoh would have to somehow prove his godhood, but usually he could just get poisoned, and then the priests end up getting proven right, and they claim it was all, an act of whatever, of Ra, of Amun, take your pick of the god, of Ninhursag, whatever. So I think that's really where that, and so to kind of get back to more of the question, I think that's where that need came in. Because this priestly class experienced something that wasn't real, but was so vivid that people believed it was real, and that they thought that the priests were protecting them from it, and that they needed to be protected from it. And so they got used to the idea that there needs to be this one special person, the shaman, in a tribal culture. Not that tribalism needs a shaman, but in this case we've got one. That the shaman would, would be the one that would protect them. And I really, that's the best answer I've got. And there's some degree of research on this, but you can only go so far to where, you run out of history. Of recorded history, I should say, not history itself, but you run out of recorded history. And so, you run into a problem. But the best evidence, in my opinion, shows is that there was no religion whatsoever thousands of years ago. And that not that humans weren't creative, but that their creative pursuits, their creative efforts reflected reality. And then there's a point where it stops doing that. And that's when I think something, some drug, a sacred mushroom, whatever, entered the scene. And that's when the priestly class enters the scene, the shamans. And that's when eventually, government comes into play, where government becomes the will of God on earth. And that's why, I've always said that I think religion is more dangerous than governments. Because religion exists outside of, government is a fiction too. But you can point at your senator. You cannot point at the demon. You know what I mean? Like, how do you disprove that to somebody that's so, that's just so damned believing? You can't. Or at least it seems like you can't most of the time. That's why religion's so dangerous. In any of them, please. I'm not knocking Christianity here. I'll happily knock Judaism, take your pick. So that's my guess where the idea of heroes, kind of came from. Now, there's nothing wrong with, we need to differentiate a little bit. There's nothing wrong with role models. And sometimes the word hero can be used interchangeably with role models. And that's okay. I really think that's okay. As long as you keep in mind that everybody's, nobody's perfect. Everybody's got flaws. Everybody has shit they're working through. But you can have role models. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, Mike Elgin was a role model journalistically. Steve Gibson of Security Now was a role model for my podcast. I've had lots of role models. I could go down a crazy list of pantheon of role models. And sometimes I will use the word hero for them. But the idea that you need a man that is over you, better than you, or whatever, however you want to perceive it, I think that really comes out of just a complete, from getting out of touch with reality. And it's something deeply, just so deeply seated in the concept of civilization itself. It's not something inside of humans, I don't think. Humans get nurtured to think that they need this thing, that they need this kind of protection and all that, right? I don't know if I want to go this far, but even the idea, because some people will say, well, that it comes out of, your dad is heroic and your mother was heroic. Well, when you get into some degree of evolutionary psychology, depending on which way you stand on it, because I don't buy into the whole RK shit, That's nonsense, and I've debunked it on Sovereign Tech already. Don't tell me I need to debunk it. I did. It's up to you to go find it. Okay? Really. Because that's what I keep getting told as well. If you don't think, you show me where he said this and all. It's like, are you serious? Anyway, so there, I turned the tables. You go find it. I'm sorry, I don't think anybody listening on Patreon would accuse me of any of this. It's just, I'm just mouthing off. But anyway, with the RK, or not with the RK, not at all with the RK. With evolutionary psychology, as I understand it and subscribe to it, okay, you know, babies really didn't know who their parents were. I do not agree, and I don't think the evidence holds up, that monogamy is something like natural, that evolved. I just don't agree with that at all. And I think there is so much. You can just look at what we were talking about earlier, the representations of reality that were put on the cave walls by our ancient ancestors do not show the nuclear family. They don't. I'm not saying that it's wrong if you're in the nuclear family. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that it wasn't a part of the program. And I think the evidence stands highly for that, despite what all these, supposedly logical arguments people lay out for this sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with having a nuclear family. I'm not saying that, folks. I'm just saying that it wasn't there. Okay, so my point being is that kids had no idea maybe who their parents were. I mean, maybe they'd have like a special feeling with their mother or something. Okay, but everybody, it takes a village to raise a kid, right? That's how it was. And you can still find cultures today where that's how it was. They don't have this understanding of science and all that. They can't, prove parentage, obviously. So I don't think that it comes from the parents. This need for a hero or someone to watch over them and all of this. I don't think that really happens that way. I don't think that it's some kind of biological imperative that exists. I think it's one that's nurtured because people just don't know any other way. It's what they're taught, that this is how it is. And it doesn't, of course, obviously we know it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not glorifying, Paleolithic humans by any means. I think there's some things that are worth looking into in that regard. We might talk about that in episode 191 of this week's Sovereign Tech. But I'm certainly not glorifying it as somehow like this is how you should live or anything like that. I'm not saying that. Okay. But that's where I think heroes come from. It all starts with the shamans. It starts with the priestly class that, through the use of psychedelics and whatever, brought on unreality brought on supernaturalism. That's not real, but supernaturalism, superstitions, described them to other humans, and then other humans thought that they needed those that had this quote unquote supernatural experience to protect them from it and to guide them from it. And to keep them away. I mean, and there's probably a million other things that happened within all that. But that's my theory on how that really started. If I were a religious person, I'll just lay this out. If I were a religious person, I would say that the need for heroes and the need for governments and people being over you and all that started with somebody trying to take the place of God, trying to take you away from God, because God is the only authority. I mean, and even in, Judeo-Christian tradition, you get plenty of stories about that. Like I said, you have Nimrod, you have, the books of Samuel, where Samuel says, you don't want a king, and it's interesting. When you look at the book of Judges, that's a pretty good way to set up a society. Is that there is no one ruler. Everything's literally, society itself is decentralized. The Israelites are in all these different little groups in all these different little towns. Each one has a judge. The judge cannot tell you what to do. He's just some kind of arbiter, to some degree. And, and they were chosen by God through whatever means, But it's fascinating that that's in Torah, that's in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Of how to set things up, because I think that's a pretty good direction to do it in. How did that come to be? Well, that's another story. How did they figure that out? Because obviously there isn't, or at least in my opinion, obviously not in my opinion, I think it's not opinion, there isn't a God, okay? How did they put this together? How did they figure that out? That is worth exploring. and you can ask me about it if you want me to explore it with you. But anyway, that's right. Again, the idea of heroes comes from the shamanistic class, the priestly class that came out of, some psychedelic experience that a person just described really, really well, and everybody else believed it, because how could someone not see this and describe it so well, and we're so in touch with, with reality and all that. Not to say that ancient humans were stupid. It's just that they didn't really have any reason to doubt, I think. Especially the way it was probably so fervently described and how wild it was. It was such new ideas. And, I'll just end off with this. Some people go so far, I think like maybe your Terence McKenna's and some others, to say that without psychedelics, without, mushrooms, without all, psilocybin, all these different things, humanity would have never achieved all that it's achieved. Like computers and all these things, because somebody had to dream that up. How'd they dream it up? Steve Jobs talks about how taking LSD was the best thing he ever did in his life, and look how great, look how great a life Steve Jobs led and all this stuff. Well, correlation is not causation. That's one of the first logical, precepts I think that everybody should understand. But whatever. But to respond to that. No, I don't think there's any. I mean, one could argue that we could have evolved a lot faster if that never happened. What really allowed for human creativity and all that we now pretty much know was due to the regular ingestion of fat. Like literally of fat. That humans ate that a lot in their meals. The cooked foods is what allowed for, the human brain to achieve so much. Maybe the priestly class could have harmed all kinds of things. I mean, who knows what could have been possible without it? I mean, but that's just the realm of speculation. But I'm just going to say that I don't think mushrooms and drugs were required for humans to achieve something wonderful. In fact, the story might have been quite the opposite. But that's all up to speculation. Anyway, woo! I think that's enough for this week. How long did we go? Wow, we're about to push 2 hours. So thank you for all the questions. I will get to more next week, of course. I may release another episode this week for people to consume on Patreon only. Of course, there will be a new episode of Sovereign Tech this week on Saturday, as always. And I've got some great stuff lined up, if I can get to it all. So thank you to everybody for donating through Patreon. It means the world to me. Got some exciting stuff coming up. And if you have any questions with anything I say on here, like I said, before you go walking away from me, let's talk about it. Okay? I would love to be proven wrong on some of the things I think. Believe me. But as yet, I haven't had enough evidence to say otherwise. So, and then there's some things where we just have fun speculating, much like with the question that we just went over. I don't think I got into the solution of what to do about the state. Well, we talked about the solutions, and it is grounding yourself in reality, having children grow up with a firm grasp on reality. And how do you get children to grow up with a firm grasp of reality? By letting them explore, by not locking them away in the house, by peaceful parenting and all this stuff, by really letting them experience it. I mean, the answer to a lot of the question that was asked, we know from the answers that we're already implementing, as anarchists and whatever else in our personal lives, and how we treat others and all that. We don't treat others because we're concerned some demon's going to swoop them up, or some fiction, like a lot of terrorism is. Not all, but I mean, there are bad people doing bad things. There's no question about that. Okay, but anyway. Yeah, the answer to a lot of these questions can be found in the solutions we're enacting today, I think. So anyway, enough of that. Carpe Lucem, everybody. I will see you on Saturday, as always. And, of course, I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovereign Tech. Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovereign Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.